Right, well, greetings everyone, hello. Welcome to the Philosophy Club for March 23rd here in Bétet in the middle of France, and welcome to people here and online. And I'm going to normally start, as I do, with a sort of run through of what I've been up to this week. It's been quite busy and interesting, and what the world's been up to. Then we'll do our usual sequence. Well, you know, where to start really. I attended this important group that I belong to, which works for restorative justice, run by a lady in New York State, Priscilla Prutzman. And it's practitioners who believe that there's another way to deal with conflict than violence, bullying, you know, threats, etc. There's this thing called restorative justice that can be practiced, and it's a program in schools. She works in New York schools, and nationally, and also internationally. I met them in India. So anyway, that was really good. We had people come online for that meeting, discussing the state of the world and what we can do. A lot of the people were from the States, so they were discussing Trump and the assault on education. Most of the people are educators, teachers. So, and that day Trump had announced he's going to shut down the Ministry of Education, and put everything back to the States, which sounds okay, reasonable, except that some things I think should be centrally organised nationally. In Britain, for instance, the health service is run by the Ministry of Health, and if it said, okay, we're going to devolve this to all the counties, Sussex, Essex, etc., it would be chaos. So yes, some things should be devolved, but I think probably education should have a central, like here in France, it's all the schools follow a curriculum set nationally. And if the south of France, the north of France, Brittany, everything started doing their own thing, it would cause some trouble. I can imagine in the States that some of the Confederate states in the South will want to start writing their history books. That the Confederate states were right and the Union people were horrible, and it's going to restart the American Civil War, which is the reason one has a national education service, I suspect. But so anyway, that's one thing I've been up to, and we also discussed many other topics to do with the Trump business and wider issues. And then I attended a very interesting book launch of this colleague of mine, Uday Dandavati, this book called Being and Belonging, A Journey of Curiosity and the Imagination. He's a design expert, originally from India, and I met him through my work with various Indian intellectuals discussing the state of India and the autocracy of Modi, and what can academics and intellectuals do to sort of mitigate that growing tension between the Hindu worldview of the extreme right in India for the Hindus, versus the sort of tolerant, no, India for everyone, whether you're Christian, Muslim, whatever. Uday is interesting chap who ended up living in San Francisco. He did a degree in design in India and then emigrated to the US, and he's built a successful career for himself as a designer. But during the lockdown, he sort of rethought his what he's doing. He's reached a stage in life when he's had the successful career. Now he's on the edge of the forest, to use his vocabulary. He's thinking of the traditional Indian 4 stages of life. And in the 3rd stage of life, you kind of go to the forest, you take retreat, you leave the householder life, and you reflect on the spiritual kingdoms, preparing for the 4th stage of life, which is release, liberation, moksha. So anyway, and he has travelled all over the world designing things, working professionally for big companies like Microsoft and all the rest. But he's got a philosophy that designers should work with the people that they're working with. And so if you're designing a gizmo, you should go and talk to the people that will be using it and see what they want, what do they need, before you sort of impose it on them. And he spoke very well. There were some brilliant people on the call. I was one of 6 people asked to comment on the book, which I'd read religiously in the previous couple of weeks. And some top people from Microsoft were there, and other, professional design people, professors of design studies and so on. I gave a little philosophical overview because he didn't realise this, but his book is called Being and Belonging. I'm the guy that wrote the book Being and Knowledge. And there's quite a lot of metaphysics in his book. He talks about what is being, and how can we... The point of life is not to have a job, it's to live, to be. And our professional work, our working life, should be to augment that for ourselves and each other. And so he's moving in the direction of looking at, what is being itself. And I was able to say, okay, so I wrote the book Being and Knowledge. There's a lot of metaphysics in his book. Also, he discovered poetry during his lockdown, and he became a poet. And he's published 3 volumes of poetry the last 3 years. So I was able to say, well, hey, join the club. I was a poet since I was 15, and I set up an order of peace poets. So I invited him to join us, and he was happy to do so. So anyway, great guy, Uday Dandavati. And his daughter actually moderated the Zoom with about 50 people present. So it was really well done. Of course, we've just had the spring equinox, so it's showing signs of getting a bit warmer, although occasionally it seems to slip back into being cold again. But hopefully the cold spells get shorter and shorter and the warm spells get longer and longer. This is the plan. I've also been religiously performing my duty as one of the local librarians here in the village, and that involves taking library books to school, our local school here in the village, which I think is very important. I'm a great lover of books, you probably know this if you've been watching my philosophy club, and I want kids, the next generation, to appreciate books as well. They're always on their phones nowadays, or screens, but books are special too. So it's an honour to go and, deliver books to the local school children, because we want them to realise that books are fun too. Talking of books, I'm reading an interesting book at the moment. It's by a professional historian, very, very important, History of Herod the Great, the dark villain of the Gospels. And I'm determined to get through this detailed, comprehensive study of his life, because he's a really interesting character, actually. He has a terrible press in the Gospels, obviously, and he does go crazy at the end of his life. He was a close friend of the Romans, the Roman emperors. He wasn't actually really Jewish. He was an Arab, Nabatean, and Idumean, and so the Jews didn't really like him. And he had an ambivalent relationship to Judaism, but he did build their temple, their third temple, which was a huge feat of architecture. He was a great builder. The wall of it still stands, the Wailing Wall, which the Jews still go and do their prayers at. I've been there with, visits to Jerusalem. And he built the port of Caesarea and other places. He was Masada. So I want to understand what made him tick, which is why I'm reading the history in detail. Because I'm doing this commentary on the Gospel of St. Matthew, and I'm trying to understand the political background to the whole storyline. I mean, Jesus would have known the story of Herod the Great. He had to deal with 2 of his sons, Herod Antipas, who ruled around Galilee, Tiberias, who wasn't very pleasant and had John the Baptist killed. But he also knew Herod Philip, who was the youngest son of Herod the Great, who was a much nicer and kinder person. and he got on better with him. Jesus, I think, took refuge in the territories of Herod Philip, including Caesarea Philippi, named after him, which I've been to. It's now called Banyas. And it's really interesting, if you go there, there was a temple to Pan, the Greek god of nature, in a cave where the water gushes out down the mountain and then goes down the hill and becomes the River Jordan, eventually. And it's really interesting. That was Jesus' favourite go-to place to talk with his disciples in private. And they played what I call the "Who do you think I am" game there. He goes around asking them, who do you think I am? And that's interesting that took place there in the realm of Herod Philip. And that he felt secure enough to be there. The other thing I've discovered this week, which is just fascinating in the Matthew commentary, is that Bethsaida, which is not far from there, and it's where Peter and Andrew, who were brothers, came from, two of the most important disciples, and also James and John both came from Bethsaida, which at that time was a fishing village or town on the north shore of Galilee, but it was in the realm of Herod Philip. And it was, what I've discovered from research is that it was a really important place. I didn't know this before this week. Way back in the time of King David, like 1000 BC, it was the capital of another little kingdom called Geshur, which was Aramaic speaking, and an independent kingdom, nothing to do with Israel. And they were trading and dealing with David on equal terms. I think all archaeologists agree that the Bible view of Kingdom of David is grossly inflated. It wasn't a huge, great empire. It was a small little state, Israel. And so this place, Geshur, was sort of equal terms. It was a pagan state, worshipping the ancient, Aramaic gods, one of whom was Hadad, the storm god. So this is interesting. I speculate in the Gospel of Matthew commentary that it's really interesting that one of Jesus' main home turfs was this separate Aramaic kingdom, Geshur, which obviously at that time it was ruled by the Romans, which obviously had a sort of sense of independence from Israel and Jerusalem. And they were proud of their Aramaic heritage. And don't forget, Jesus spoke Aramaic. And they worshipped a pantheon of gods and goddesses. And archaeologists have discovered in Bethsaida all these ancient sites, temples, coins, all this stuff. And when I visited Bethsaida back in the 90s, I met the chief archaeologist in charge of the excavations, who's a chap called Dr. Rami Arav, who is still there. He's still running the archaeological excavations in Bethsaida, and they're finding out all this stuff, how important it was as a place. And that's kind of the home turf of these disciples. Jesus himself spent time living there. And then they moved as a base to Capernaum, which is just a few miles away. I speculate, and it's speculation, why are James and John called the sons of thunder in the Gospels? That was their nickname, the sons of thunder. Well, the thunder god, Hadad, was the local deity of Bethsaida. I bet it was like a private joke that Jesus was having with the disciples. Oh, they come from Bethsaida. They're obviously devotees of the storm god. We'll call them the sons of thunder. So there's lots of detail I'm finding in this commentary that I'm doing. I think it's like path-breaking work. Nobody's gone into this level of detail. I don't think it was possible before, but archaeology makes it possible now. I'm also working on the Love Journal. That's coming out shortly. And I read a very interesting article by Naomi Wolf, who is a New York-based author. I don't always agree with her, and in fact in the Love Journal we have a critical review of one of her recent publications, which was saying, oh God, the pagan gods are coming back. it's all terrible, we have to worship the monotheistic Judeo-Christian God or America's doomed. She's obviously Jewish herself, and so is feeling overwhelmed by paganism. But, so that got a rather negative review from Mari, my Finnish pagan poet who came here. I straddle both sides of this conversation as a Christian Druid with Sufi and other interests. So I think that we've got to declare peace between the people that hate the pagans and the pagans that hate the Christians or the Jews. There's got to be a peace treaty between these factions. And, Naomi Wolf, anyway, has written a very interesting article about why people voted for Trump. Because I've not been able to understand why on earth people voted for Trump. But I'm someone that knows and loves New York. I've spent time there. I've fallen in love there. I've gone to plays there and done talks there. I've been to the UN headquarters. And she described what happened to New York under Biden, which is something I hadn't realised. Which she claims that over 200,000 refugees from outside the US basically suddenly descended on New York. They were shipped in long distance and were given, from Biden's generosity, were catered for, given fast track to being well looked after. And she describes that the whole of New York changed to her as a New Yorker for many years. People were sort of taking over the underground. It no longer felt safe to walk about at night. People were misbehaving in the parks, and she was saying that normally when you immigrate to a country, you kind of acculturate. You learn the mores, the behaviour patterns of the host nation, and you kind of adapt to them. What she felt was this was all done so fast that these new influx didn't have time to do that, and the locals felt utterly overwhelmed. And she writes anyway. She's a very good writer, and she says this, my friends, is why Biden lost the election, because he was seen, and it wasn't just happening in New York; it was happening in other American cities. People felt swamped by sort of an influx of people. Now, and she writes in a very convincing way as a local. My comment on that would be to say that that's probably all true, and it is probably one of the reasons people voted for Trump. However, I don't think that a Trump presidency is going to be the answer to this problem. I've always said that the same in Europe, when people complain about immigrants coming across on boats, flooding into Europe and so on. I've always said that what we should be doing is having a developed peace policy, so the countries they're fleeing from are not falling apart, like Syria, North Africa, Libya, all the countries that people are flooding in from. We should be actually helping, retool their own social infrastructure and their own welfare systems and their own sort of medical systems and so on, so that people would choose to stay. And it's the same, I think, in the Americas. Instead of building a wall and having an aggressive policy, and now Trump is sort of going around the streets, picking up people and flying them back to El Salvador or whatever. What America should have been doing these last decade or whatever is developing a peace policy which would help countries in the southern parts of the Americas to develop their own, sense of well-being, prosperity, and so on, so they don't all get attracted to coming into the States, which obviously couldn't accommodate so many. So anyway, it's an interesting article, and I could, give thanks that Naomi's written it down as an eyewitness of what's been going on. The other thing to say is about the Trump thing is I disagree with about 99% of what he's been up to, but his appointing of Robert Kennedy Jr., I think, was quite a good thing, because I set up an international commission of inquiry into the etiology of COVID-19 back when we were all in lockdown, tried to find out the cause. Etiology is the scientific name for the cause of diseases. And we were stonewalled. We never got any answers. I wrote to everyone I could think of, in authority, and said, like, here's a commission, please, what do you think? And I wrote to Trudeau as a Canadian and said, why don't you make this official, set up a commission? Never got a reply from him. And I'm hoping that Robert Kennedy will respond to my letter and maybe give some testimony, because I think he has a lot of background information about the origins and the etiology of COVID-19. And I've done some research. It's all now coming out in public that actually this was a leak from Wuhan. What's very interesting is there's an article by a Greek expert, PhD in Athens, who's discovered that the German intelligence service, the BND, it's like our MI6 in Britain, already in 2020 had done research and discovered that COVID was a leak from a lab in Wuhan. But the then German Chancellor refused to allow them to go public with this. She said to their report, thank you very much, okay, it was a leak, we're not going to tell anyone. And she swore them to secrecy. In 2020 already. Presumably she was afraid of the consequences, geopolitical conflict with China and all that stuff. But I think that was an act of cowardice. She's no longer in power. And then the new Chancellor, Scholz, who's still, I believe, the Chancellor for a little while longer, he also kept the lid on it. He refused to release this report from the BND. And again, I think this is just cowardly, and I think people are grown-ups. We deserve to know the truth. And anyway, it eventually came out. The German minister told the BND, okay, you can publish your report, only in December last year. So, finally, after 4 years or whatever, since I set up my commission of etiology into COVID-19, we're finally getting the facts. The implications of that are huge. Oh, and by the way, the CIA have now released a report, surprise, surprise, saying the same thing. Yes, we kind of knew all along it was a lab leak, but we didn't want to upset people. But the implications for me as a peace researcher are that the whole world was in lockdown because a military research went wrong. And now the German government is trying to get gain-of-function research banned worldwide, saying, a bit late, but hey, we shouldn't be doing this kind of stuff, guys. Obviously. And apparently Trump is going to outlaw it in America, or that's the promise. But what about other countries? So, unless we get some sort of moral education going for scientists, I would like all scientists to have to sign a kind of Hippocratic oath, like medical scientists have to, that they won't misuse their knowledge for harming people. So I believe all natural scientists, doctors, PhDs, DSCs should sign a similar thing, like a Pythagorean oath, to not misuse science for weapons and mass destruction. So that's a project I'm working on. I've also written to Congresswoman Luna, great name, isn't it? Luna, L-U-N-A, who has been appointed by Trump to lead the Commission of Inquiry into the Kennedy assassination and the other state secrets hidden in the archives, including what happened on 9/11. Well, okay, finally, years later, we get a commission, so I wrote to Congresswoman Luna saying, well, hello, I did actually write a 2-volume book about 9/11, which I published a few years back. I'm the only historian to spend a year researching all the facts, and I set up a historical commission into 9/11 and the events of that tragic day, but also the events just before, when Shah Ahmed Massoud was killed in Afghanistan, who was a great resistance leader of the Afghan moderates. Now the story is he was killed by Taliban, and the extremist Osama bin Laden did the Twin Towers. In my research, I think I discovered this is probably not the only story. There's a lot of unanswered questions. And, it's unbelievable that America spent trillions of dollars occupying and conquering Afghanistan. to replace the Taliban with the Taliban, because they're now running the country. I mean, they could have given my commission of 9/11 studies a few 100,000. We could have solved the problem of what was behind it. And I'm sure it wasn't just Osama bin Laden. I think there were levels of conspiracy behind that. And I've gone into 19 possible explanations for 9/11. What were the geopolitical powers involved? What were Russia? What were China wanting? Etc., etc. Anyway, I've written to Congresswoman Luna offering, she should designate somebody to study my work, because it would speed up her inquiry into 9/11. So I'll let you know what happens.
Excuse me to interrupt.
Sure, go for it.
Do you have also the hypothesis of inside job from America?
Yes, that's one of the 20.
Okay.
Yeah.
What makes Luna tick?
Well, there is that. It's such a great name. I love it. And then, so yes, Gaza continues, and one of the one of the great tragedies of this time is we haven't been able to stop this killing, and now Netanyahu has restarted bombing people living in tents. What on earth can the world community do to prevent this slaughter that's going on? I hope Keir Starmer grows some hair on his chest and just stops, this nonsense going on. We should send, I think, a peacekeeping force into Gaza, really, to protect these Palestinians. After all, it was Britain that caused these problems by, demolishing the old Ottoman Empire and taking over the territory, and it was our mandate, Palestine. And then the Balfour Declaration we issued during World War I. Well, I think we have a moral duty to ensure that the terms of the Balfour Declaration are carried out, which is, yes, Britain looks favourably on a homeland for the Jews as long as it doesn't damage the existing populations. That was the caveat. And I think, as a sense of honour and responsibility, we should do our best to ensure that happens. I mean, it's a bit late now, but at least Palestine should become an independent state, and Israel needs to back off and stop bombing people in tents.
Well, that means that Netanyahu would be put in jail, wouldn't it?
Well, I think he might be heading for jail anyway. He's obviously a corrupt guy. I won't weep. I think that the Israeli people, the vast mass of decent, ordinary Israelis, don't want a never-ending war on a damaged and traumatized people. So I think peace is the only answer, and peace through truth is what's needed, which is why I also set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East. And I'd like the funding that's going into bombing Gaza to go to that, which would create dialogues between Palestinians and Israelis and people in neighbouring countries, Lebanon, Jordan, all of whom stand to benefit if a peace can be won.
I'm surprised because we know a tool that can be used to encourage people for making peace could be economical sanctions. We say, for example, you do not make trade with Israel since it doesn't change. America is using it a lot, but nobody. There are some boycott campaigns from people, but from states, nothing is said.
Well, this is obviously what should change. I mean, in a rational world, the West has used a lot the phrase "a rules-based order," and they complain that Putin's invaded Ukraine. It broke the rules-based order, is their rhetoric. I kind of agree with that, but I think underlying a rules-based order is an ethically based order. And as a philosopher, in the tradition of Kant and Pufendorf and Grotius, I would say international law starts with an ethical approach to human relationships. We can't go around bombing each other just because, we feel we have some God-given or power-crazed right to do so. So I think the sooner we rationally sit around the table and work out these problems, the better. And Paris would be a good forum for having these meetings, I think. Or London, or wherever, Switzerland. The another thing I want to say is Swiss Peace are very active in Bern in Switzerland. They're doing a lot of peace work, and they're helped by the Swiss government, but they're an autonomous institute. And it was founded about 20 years ago by 100 notables in Swiss intellectual life, who said, okay, so we have an army, we all have to do voluntary work, you know, every Swiss person has to do 1 or 2 years of service. Even Carl Jung had to spend time, you know, dressing up and being a soldier. He was a medical doctor, but what they said is we want peace to be given as much priority as war and militarism. And so the Swiss take peace very seriously. And I've written to them, I'm in touch with them, because they're one of the few people that do interfaith mediation work. Their foreign ministry is good at this. So, you know, let's get the Swiss and other countries, the Irish, working on this and get some rationality restored to the international system. So anyway, that's kind of a little overview of, and then I've got a meeting for the International Delphic Academy coming up at the end of the month. I'm trying to get the artists of the world to, you know, do our bit for peace. This is with my hat on as a poet. But there are musicians and theatre people. I heard a very brilliant talk by an American-Russian expert about how theatre began as a way to heal trauma in extreme crises. Ancient Greece wasn't an easy place to live in. There were what's called ravaging warfare, which was a horrendous, you know, you slaughter everyone in the town kind of thing. With those kind of traumas going on, the Greeks invented theatre as a way of letting off steam without having to kill each other. So you go and see a play of Medea and you just say, God, that's horrible, I'm not going to kill my kids, you know. So I think theatre has a big role to play in, you know, I'd love to see a Delphic Academy chapter in Palestine and one in Israel, and then for us to put on a sort of play about all these horrors. We need to use theatre to effect catharsis, which is the Greek word for the purification of the emotions. Aristotle said in his commentary on theatre and the arts and poetry, that's why it's so important, because it purifies the human soul. Otherwise we're pretty bestial and we can degenerate, you know. Art is not a little luxury add-on, it's part of the moral education of humanity. So that's why I'm doing the Delphic Academy thing. Anyone that wants to get involved as an artist is welcome to contact me. And the Swiss Peace has an active art and peace program, for instance. Okay, that's my little overview. Yes, any other questions, comments? Yeah.
Or just on the last point,
Yes.
will you include a movie?
Absolutely,
Yeah,
yes, film.
because I guess
Yeah,
at that time they didn't have
No.
any way of doing movies, but nowadays,
it's a new art form.
yeah, it's a very powerful one.
Very powerful, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And definitely there's a section, and I've been researching the Sundance Film Festival. I've been involved in helping make a documentary on Druids, we're trying to get premiered. And I've just finished watching an absolutely brilliant film by Charlie Chaplin called City Lights. I don't know if you've seen City Lights, anyone? It was made in 1931. It's a black and white silent movie. Already there was talking in movies. Al Jolson had done his movie, but Chaplin chose to do this one as an homage to the silent movie industry. It's a beautiful love story about this tramp who's Chaplin, down at heels on the city's, you know, edge, falls in love with a blind flower girl who is selling flowers on the street and can't see. And it shows such a beautiful aspect to American culture. The America that, you know, I used to believe in and still want to believe in, which is compassionate, is not against poverty, is